Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise on a matter of public interest which goes to the issue of violence which is fuelled by alcohol and drugs. This has unfortunately been in the headlines again even this year since the start of the year, and we've seen much discussion and even controversy around who is involved and how we should respond to the issue. So I just wanted to cover briefly today some of the current understanding of the scale of the issue, to touch on some of the groups who are responding, and to update the Senate on developments just in the last fortnight that I think are very positive in terms of developing a national response to a holistic response to preventing some of these issues that we have seen so recently, unfortunately, in King's Cross on New Year's Eve. New South Wales, in fact, more than any other state, has suffered from this violence, with over 88,000 men and women reporting that over a year period their attackers, whether they be known or unknown, were affected by drugs and alcohol. The data from the ABS supports the fact that paramedics state that almost half of all attacks on men and 35% of those on women come from complete strangers. And figures from 2011-12 show that over 70% of those were blamed on drugs or alcohol. That's a similar situation in Western Australia and Tasmania, where over 70% of physical assaults are by strangers and again blamed on drugs and alcohol. In Victoria, the figure is slightly less. It's around 60%. In Victoria, 67%, and 41, nearly 42% in South Australia. So whilst the total numbers may be less in terms of impacting our young people and things like motor vehicle accidents, it is clearly an issue that is impacting our communities across the nation. In the last 14 years, some 91 lives have been lost to what is known as the King hit or coward punch type violence. But it's important to understand that for every one of those lives that has been lost, there are many people who have been victims of that kind of attack who, while they may not have lost their life, have lost their health, their confidence. It's impacted on immediate and extended families, on peers and even workplaces. And so the burden from this kind of violence is significant, and it is spread across our nation. One of the things that has changed, and the Prime Minister picked up on this in a piece he wrote for the Daily Telegraph in January, is that in years past we tend to look at groups of young people who perhaps went out for a few drinks on Saturday night. Occasionally some of them had too many, and fights and things may have developed from that. But what we're seeing increasingly is a trend where people deliberately pre-drink before they go out, with an intention of getting absolutely blotto, and so before they even hit venues, many of them are well over the limit, are well intoxicated, and are not in control necessarily of their actions. And so it's quite it's a step change in culture. If you overlay that, the impact of illicit drugs, you have a cocktail for a disastrous situation, and the culture where in some cases people go looking for a victim as opposed to young men with too much to drink who may be spoiling for a fight. Some of the research that's been done shows that more than half of the consumed alcohol is on weekends, with nearly a third consuming pre-night out drinks. More than 40% said that a typical drinking day started between 6 and 8 p.m, with about a quarter ending before 2 a.m. and 13% continuing until around 4 a.m. in the morning. About 21% admit that they go out intending to get drunk. And interesting, in terms of this issue of violence, around 20% indicate that even if they saw a dangerous situation developing, particularly if it involved one of their friends, they wouldn't walk away, they wouldn't seek to extract themselves from the situation. So we have a culture developing that leads to a scenario where some of these violence incidents occur. Now, the response in New South Wales is understandable. Many people, when these things occur, want to know why the legislative response, in terms of throwing the book at somebody, locking them up, is not stronger. And there is a case for laws and legislation to look at a punitive side of hopefully providing a deterrent, or at least taking people with that kind of tendency off the street. But it is not the full answer, because by the time it has occurred, the damage has been done. Our emergency wards are full, the families are in distress, the person has lost their life or their health or their confidence or their mental health. That damage has been done, and so prevention has to be a large part of stopping this problem. What we have seen is across the states a number of foundations start in response, often led by the families who've been most impacted by this violence, seeking to bring about change, whether that be legislative change, whether that be change in terms of liquor licensing, response to illicit drugs, or in some cases looking at the longer-term view of education. The Prime Minister highlighted this in his article on the 10th when he acknowledged that, yes, we all want to see that response in terms of a legal response, but he also highlights that there's a need to understand the impact of drugs. There's a need to tackle it in a comprehensive and considered way, so there's not just knee-jerk reactions or actions that give the appearance of a response but don't actually have a long-term impact. And that we need to get community solutions between levels of government, police, pubs, clubs, locals and residents. And I'm glad to say that to a large extent that is starting to happen. In South Australia in particular, the group that I would refer to that has got a good reputation for this is the SammyD Foundation. Now, this foundation was established by Nat Cook and Neil Davis in 2008 after their son Sam Davis lost his life to a violent and unprovoked assault. What they've sought to do is to try and change the environment so that we don't see more of these attacks take place. And whilst they acknowledge that there is a place for a legislative response around penalties and around liquor licensing, they've sought to work proactively in three key areas: with governments, with the liquor industry, but particularly with communities, with families and with high schools. And they have touched some 25,000 young people in the 5 years that they've been operating. Their program has three main elements. The first element is about impact. Excuse the pun, but it's about what is the impact that one punch can have. Many young people who are exposed purely to the Hollywood version of violence don't understand the realities of what physical contact can do. And so the aim of this program is to interact with young people and show both the emotional and the reality of the physical impact that that violence can have. And some of the responses are showing that even months down the track, there's still a very high percentage, the 90-odd%, who have had a changed attitude because of that awareness that's been given to them about the impact of that kind of violence. They also recognise that some of the people who perpetrate this are not connected. They don't have mentors in their life to provide guidance and role modelling and examples of how to responsibly engage, how to deal with conflict or stress or other issues in their lives. And so they have a Connect program which is all about mentoring, and again some thousands of young people in South Australia have benefited from this program. And the last area where they work is seeking to inform schools, parents, organisations about how to run parties. What are the rights and responsibilities? What are the norms that occur? How can you identify dangerous situations developing? How can you diffuse them? How can you walk away from them? How can you avoid the escalation that results in that violence? All of which are important parts of changing the culture, of providing education so that more people have a motivation, are equipped to choose to make wise life choices that won't see them in that situation. Now, unfortunately, whilst SammyD have done a range of work in that area and in fact have done some research, have done much training, we don't see that replicated uniformly across the country, nor at the moment has there been an opportunity for other bodies to learn from each other as to what those different foundations are doing. And so I'm pleased to be able to report to the Senate that just this month, key organisations from different states came here to Canberra to meet together and to look at ways that they collectively can pool their resources and their knowledge and their approaches so that we can benefit from each state's experience to have a more holistic national approach to responding, whether that be in the liquor licensing area, whether that be in the area of laws and punishments, but particularly in this area of preventative work. So from Victoria, the Step Back and Think group, SammyD from South Australia, Matthew Stanley Foundation from Queensland, the Injury Control Council of Western Australia, the IF Foundation from West Australia, the Stop One Punch Can Kill from Victoria, the Queensland Homicide and Victim Support Group met, and I understand since then there have been discussions with groups out of New South Wales. But what they came to an understanding is that there is real benefit in them coming together and establishing a national framework for collaboration around research, around best practice in terms of education, and in terms of having a national strategy to make sure that there is best use of the resources that are applied. Now, as the Prime Minister indicated in his article and in subsequent comments, this is largely an issue that does fall within the remit of state and territory governments because of the laws to do both with crime and liquor around that. But that should not stop us seeking to work collaboratively between the private sector and all three levels of government to make sure that these groups who are doing this research and this education have the very best possible chance of applying best practice for the benefit of our children. And so this collective, which they've called themselves Stop the Punch, a collective and national response to violence, they have a three-phase program that they're seeking to implement, which is to get evidence-based national research which will underpin the responses at both the reactive and the proactive approaches to violence. They're looking to produce resources that can be drawn on nationally in terms of education and prevention programs. The approach would be similar in a way to the fact we have a national drug strategy where there is a coordination and a national view about how each state and territory will implement and work towards controlling drugs. And certainly COAG, through something like the Council on Law, Crime and Community Safety, may be one vehicle whereby the states can come together from the government perspective and replicate or work in parallel to the work that these groups are doing. So I think as senators representing each state and territory in Australia, it's important that we look at this issue and understand that there is the opportunity for us to support both different levels of government through COAG, but also the foundations that are working at the community level to bring together the best of their knowledge, the best practice, so that we can have a holistic approach that, where possible, will avoid, rather than just punish, the actions and the consequences that come out of alcohol and drug-fuelled violence. I commend this new national collective, Stop the Punch, to senators in this place and ask that as appropriate and as possible that you get involved in supporting the groups in your state to make sure that we do indeed provide a better future for our children.